Hey there, welcome back to another review, this time of The Empire Strikes Back. Not Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, The Empire Strikes Back. That's what it says in the movie poster, and that's what I'm going to call it. That's why I will always remember the film as just The Empire Strikes Back. And man, does The Empire Strike Back hard, and with a vengeance. This movie, it's interesting. This was a film that I watched a decent amount of times as a kid, but I probably would say I didn't watch it as much as Return of the Jedi because that was my favorite growing up, and then I probably watched this, and it's kind of interesting. It's like I watched Star Wars the least, and I watched Return of the Jedi more than I watched The Empire Strikes Back, but The Empire Strikes Back I love. I think this is an excellent film. I think this is a movie that is one of the best sequels I can think of. It's right up there with Aliens. It's right up there with Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It's it is an excellent sequel, and it really does establish the Empire as a valid threat. It's too bad that the sequel, it's too bad though, The Return of the Jedi kind of ruins that, but that being said, Empire is still a timeless classic. It's an excellent film. Um, Empire Strikes Back was released in 1980. It's directed by Irvin Kershner this time, not George Lucas, because George Lucas decided he wanted to make this sequel independently. So he ended up coming up with his own funding for the film via, getting a loan and money that he earned from the first movie and its success. So he decided he wanted to fund the film himself, and he wanted to be more of a producer and keep an eye on ILM, who moved from their original location to a bigger studio in Marin, California. So George wanted to oversee that. George wanted to be there, Marin County, California, and he wanted to oversee that, and he wanted to be more of a producer. He didn't want to direct Empire Strikes Back. So his first choice was Irvin Kershner, who was a professor at USC, at the USC Film School that George attended. And he always liked Irvin Kershner, and of course he was a former professor, so it was a way for him to give back to the people who taught him his craft. And at first Irvin was like, I don't want to do it because, I don't know, I don't really want to do a sequel. And then he called up his agent, and his agent was like, take it. And so Irvin Kershner did, and the rest is history. This stands the test of time as one of the best films he's ever directed, and I would say that his approach and his style, which was a more his directing style was a little bit different than George Lucas. His style was more character driven and intense, and Kershner was more well known for smaller scale character driven films. Um, but this was not really one of them. But it felt like though that there was seriousness. Things got serious in Empire Strikes Back. It wasn't as much of a adventure fantasy as Star Wars was, and it was a good decision to make. And it's part in part due to Kershner's input, and in large part due to actually George Lucas, because George Lucas wrote the story and hired a screenwriter named Leigh Brackett. He hired her to write the film, and he's a science fiction author, and she finished her first draft in early 1978, and it was very similar to the film that you see. It was very similar to the finished product, but except Darth Vader does not reveal that he's Luke's father, and the first draft Brackett would write from this, Luke's father appears as a ghost to instruct Luke. Lucas said he was disappointed with the draft, though, but before he could discuss it with her, she actually died of cancer, which is really too bad. So may she rest in peace, as well as Irvin Kershner, who's also no longer with us. With no writer available, Lucas had to write in the next draft himself. So he decided to write the draft, and he originally called it Episode 2, but then he decided I don't want to do that, so he called it episode 5 because maybe he had the ideas of the prequels in his head then. And then it's one of those things where when you see if you saw the film in 1980 and you saw the title crawl, Star Wars, episode 5, right? Episode 5, what the hell? What? Episode 5, it was confusing because Star Wars didn't have episode 4 attached to it until a later re-release after Empire Strikes Back. So anyway, Lucas is the one that added the plot twist about Darth Vader being Luke's father, and he also took the script to a little bit of darker extreme by having Han Solo imprisoned in carbonite and left in limbo. And of course, this whole story, this whole backstory, this ended up, this whole story, this whole plot point of Vader being Luke's father caused a huge ripple effect for the entire rest of the franchise. And you can debate whether it's a good or bad thing. And I don't mind it. I think it's a twist that actually works, and it's one of the most memorable moments in cinema. And if you had no idea what to expect when you saw this in the theater in 1980 and it wasn't spoiled for you, and more than likely it probably wasn't going to be unless there's some asshole in the audience who spoils it for you. But there was no such thing as the internet, and magazines did not spoil things like that. And I guess if you read the novelization, it might have spoiled it. But I don't know. I don't know for sure or not. Maybe they even went to extra extremes to the novelization, and with the novelization, they're like, no. No, I think they did, because I have the storybook for Empire Strikes Back, and it does reveal, that Vader is Luke's father. And so, with this new backstory in place, Lucas decided that the series would be a trilogy, changing Empire Strikes Back from episode 2 to episode 5 in the next draft, like I was mentioning earlier. Lucas then saw that Lawrence Kasdan had completed writing Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the screenplay impressed him, so he hired Lawrence Kasdan to write the next drafts with the additional input from director Irvin Kershner. Kasdan, Kershner, and producer Gary Kurtz saw the film as more of a serious and adult film, which was helped by the new darker storyline, and developed the series from the light adventure roots of the first film. Now, that's not saying that Empire is not light. It does have light moments. It has great banter between Leia and Han, and C-3PO and Han. This antagonistic relationship between those two. It still has, light moments, but they're not as many as the first film. There's definitely a darker subtext. There's definitely more layers to this movie, and the title really does fit the film. The Empire really does strike back. And this is when the series became a trilogy, because the first film was never intended to be the first installment of a trilogy. Even Lucas probably would admit it. As you can see here, he wasn't even intending this to be a trilogy. It was just going to be another sequel. But he decided, no, I want this to be a story that spans over a trilogy, over three films. And by making that, having that big bombshell that Vader is Luke's father, and by having the film being basically what it is, it's the middle installment. And critics back then had a problem with that, and then as time went on, after Return of the Jedi, then people started to really see Empire for what it really is. It's a middle installment, and as a middle installment, it does an excellent job. It really does its job really well. Star Wars was meant to be a standalone movie, and it does a great job being that. Empire is not meant to be a standalone film. It's a middle installment of a trilogy, and it's one of the best I've ever seen. So, in that regard, the film is remarkable. And the effects are another remarkable thing. I mean, wow, especially the visual effects in Empire Strikes Back. They up the ante and then some. The model work by ILM, the stop motion work by Phil Tippett, who worked on inventing this new form of blue screen effects and a new way to shoot it with a camera, which he would go on to win an Oscar for Dragon Slayer a year later, which he would go on to call Go Motion. And I'm still impressed to this day by those visual effects of the AT-ATs, walking in the snow on Hoth. Other visual effects are great too. The model work, like I said, they really did up the ante. Like there's an Imperial Star Destroyer now that's even bigger than a regular Star Destroyer, and the look of Cloud. I think it's Cloud City. I think that's what it's called, Cloud City. Yeah, the look of Cloud City and all those other things is really effective. Um, Great use of matte paintings. Just an absolute, really, really great looking masterpiece of visual effects. And there's a lot of stuff that they worked on. Of course, you also have Yoda, the puppet, and it's an amazing thing that Jim Henson and Stuart Freeborn were able to work on to create a puppet that was so lifelike. And in large part, Mark Hamill's performance is also something that you really should point to as to why the Yoda puppet is so impressive and why it looks so lifelike, because Mark Hamill did such an amazing job acting with this puppet. And in designing Yoda, Stuart Freeborn used his own face as a model, and then he added the wrinkles of Albert Einstein for the appearance of exceptional intelligence. And the sets for Dagobah, they were built 5 feet above the stage floor, allowing puppeteers to crawl underneath and hold up the Yoda puppet. The setup presented communication problems for Frank Oz, who portrayed Yoda, as he was underneath the stage and unable to hear the crew and Mark Hamill above. Hamill later expressed his dismay as being the only human character on the set for months. He felt like a trivial element on a set of animals, machines, and moving props. Kershner then later commended Hamill for his performance with the puppet. And he really did. He did a fantastic job to the point where you didn't even think it was a puppet. It was that good. And Frank Oz, of course, did a great job performing the voice of Yoda as well. And you could definitely hear the little bit of Miss Piggy in Yoda. But it's still a great performance and great puppet work. And I'd rather take a puppet any day over CGI. That's just me. But not the puppet in episode 1, because for some reason that looked like shit. I don't know why. It was the way that George shot the film. As for filming, the movie was shot in Norway on a glacier near the town of Finns on March 5th, 1979. That's when filming began. Like with the filming of Star Wars or the production of Tunisia coincided with the area's first major rainstorm in 50 years, the weather was against the film crew. While filming in Norway, they encountered the worst winter storm in 50 years. Once again, 50 years. It's common. I guess it's not a coincidence anymore. That seems like it's a curse or something. Temperatures dropped to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and 18 feet of snow fell. On one occasion, the crew were unable to exit their hotel. They couldn't even leave their hotel. That's how much snow that was piled up outside. Imagine that, folks. 18 feet of snow. They achieved a shot involving Luke's exit of the Wampa Cave by opening the hotel's door and opening the doors of the hotel and filming Mark Hamill running out into the snow while the crew remained warm inside. And Mark Hamill's face was scarred in a motor accident that occurred between the filming of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. And the Wampa scene was not really created to have an explanation of why he had a scar on his face. It was just they just thought that, okay, all his years of battling with the rebellion, with the rebels, would have caused the scarring. It's really too bad that that happened for Mark, because that's what happened. He got in a car accident and scarred his face up, and you can tell that the director chose to shoot Luke from a certain side of his face most of the time, because he didn't want to show the side of the face that had the very obvious scarring. And the production was then, after they shot scenes in Norway, that was then moved to Elstree Studios, where over 60 sets were built, more than double the number used in the previous film. There was a fire that happened on stage 3 during the filming of The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, which forced the budget to be increased from $18.5 million to $22 million. And by July, the budget increased $3 million more. And then filming finished by mid-September. And then, of course, about the exchange of dialogue, where Han Solo said, Leia's saying to Han before he gets encased in carbonite, she says, "I love you." And originally the script said, "I love you too." That's what Han's reaction was going to be. That's what his response was going to be. "I love you too." And that just doesn't fit Han Solo. And Harrison Ford noticed this and asked Irvin Kershner and said, this doesn't really fit the character. And I don't know if Han would really say this. And Irvin Kershner was like, I agree. So he then encouraged Harrison to ad-lib. And he did. And it was Harrison's idea for Han to have the now memorable exchange with Leia before he gets encased in carbonite, where he says, "I know." So, that's a bit of trivia that pretty much everybody pretty much knows, but for the people who don't, there you go. And during production, of course, there was this ultimate secrecy about the fact that Vader was Luke's father, and so much so that only Lucas and the writer and the director and the producer knew about it, and until Hamill, Luke himself didn't even know about it until before the scene was shot. And to preserve the dramatic opening sequences of his films, Lucas wanted the screen credits to come at the end of his movies. While this practice had become more common over the years, which is something we look at, it's like, oh, it's no big deal. But this is a highly unusual choice at the time. And the Writers and Directors Guild of America had no problem allowing it in Star Wars because the writer-director credit, George Lucas, matched the company name. But when Lucas did the same thing for the sequel, it became an issue because Lucas has his last name at the start of the film, Lucasfilm, while the director and writers had theirs at the end. And they ended up fining him over $250,000. And they attempted to pull Empire out of theaters because of this. And the Directors Guild also attacked Kershner, and to protect his director, Lucas paid all the fines to the guilds. And due to the controversy, he left the Directors and Writers Guilds and the Motion Picture Association of America. And, for that was a nice selfless act for George to do for his director, and I gotta give him credit for that. I really do. Thanks, George. And the initial budget of the film was $18 million, but then it really spiraled out of control and ended up being around $33 million. And after various increases in budget, The Empire Strikes Back became one of the most expensive films of its day, and after the bank threatened to pull George's loan, Lucas was forced to approach 20th Century Fox. Lucas then made a deal with the studio to secure the loan in exchange for paying the studio more money, but without the loss of his sequel and merchandising rights. And after the film's box office success, unhappiness at the studio over the deal's generosity to Lucas caused the studio president Alan Ladd Jr. to quit, which is too bad. And then the departure of his longtime ally caused Lucas to take Raiders of the Lost Ark to Paramount Pictures. And of course, the rest is history when it comes to that. Now, as for, the rest of the kind of stuff dealing with Empire Strikes Back, the rest of the cast from the first film comes back. Mark Hamill comes back as Luke Skywalker. He has a little bit more to do in this. He actually, in this film, he trains to become a Jedi with Yoda. And that's a main plot point of this film, is introducing Yoda and introducing, his character and his place in the franchise, in the trilogy. Harrison Ford comes back as Han Solo. He grows as a character, and I could see why Harrison has said in interviews where he wished that Han would have died in this film, but at the same time, I'm like, I really don't think he needs to die, period. I don't think that's necessary. Carrie Fisher comes back as Princess Leia. She's had more of a bigger role with the rebellion. She's leading battles and stuff for the rebellion on Hoth, and she's has even more of an attitude that she had in the first film. And she and Han develop this relationship that's antagonistic at first, but then they fall in love, and it's actually a really fun romance to watch because they have this antagonistic relationship, this love-hate relationship with one another. Billy Dee Williams is one of the new cast members for this film, who plays Lando Calrissian, and he's just so smooth. It's just, Billy Dee Williams' voice, man. I mean, Lando's a character that I think was a good addition to the franchise. And it was pretty groundbreaking at the time, especially for science fiction. In science fiction, there really weren't that many African American characters. and Lando Calrissian was one of the few, and it was a nice way to make things a little bit more equal in the world of Star Wars. Anthony Daniels, of course, reprises his role as C-3PO. David Prowse comes back as Darth Vader. James Earl Jones comes back to voice Darth Vader. Peter Mayhew plays Chewbacca again. Kenny Baker plays R2-D2. And Frank Oz is also one of the few new cast members playing Yoda. And Oz was assisted by several performers, including Catherine Mullen, David Barclay, Wendy Froud, and Deep Roy. And there's also kind of an interesting, there's also a pretty famous actor who was in this film in like a really brief role, John Ratzenberger, Cliff Clavin himself from Cheers. He portrays Major Durlin, one of the officers who led the rebels in the Battle of Hoth. And you also have Wedge Antilles comes back. Dennis Lawson comes back to play Wedge. Jeremy Bulloch plays Boba Fett. And Jason Wintergreen provided Fett's voice in the film in the original theatrical cut of the movie. And then for some reason, the special edition, 2004 special edition, the guy who played Jango Fett and Commander Cody replaces Fett's voice, which it sounds so much better. Jason Wingreen's voice sounds so much better. And I think Jason Wingreen, I think he passed away recently. Yeah, he passed away on Christmas, actually. Um, at age 95, so may you rest in peace. I always thought he had a good voice for Boba Fett. And then you have the original the original Emperor, who wasn't played by Ian McDiarmid in this. It was voiced by Clive Revill, and it was played by Elaine Baker, the wife of Rick Baker. And that's one of the few problems I have with this movie because it looks so stupid. The makeup effect is awful looking. It's really terrible. It's got like superimposed chimpanzee eyes, and it just looks shitty. The makeup effect is awful looking. It's like that's the best you could come up with. I really, when you see the film, you're like, that's the best you could come up with. Like that looks like the cheapest, like shittiest choice you could have made for the look of the Emperor. But that's really the only problem I have with the movie is that because it just looks so bad. But even in the special edition, they fix it, but it still is jarring because you have CGI and you have Ian McDiarmid from Episode 3, younger Emperor, speaking of Vader. It's supposed to be older Vader. It's supposed to be an older Emperor. So the continuity is messed up, and then just the CGI and yeah, it's I'd rather see the shitty looking Emperor than see a CGI Emperor that just sticks out like a sore thumb, but that's me personally. Um, so yeah, that's the cast. You have the new director, Irvin Kershner, who I think does a phenomenal job. Um, his best film. He really does a great job grounding the film in reality. He does a great job setting up the shots. This film is epic. Has a huge epic size and scope to it, but it's also a little bit of a darker film, and that was a nice approach to take. It was a totally unexpected approach if you think about it. If you saw the first Star Wars and you're going into the sequel, I highly doubt a lot of people expected the sequel to be the Empire coming back with a vengeance and really handing the rebels a pretty heavy blow. I mean, cutting off Luke's hand, capturing Han Solo and freezing him, and giving him the Boba Fett, and then in turn handing him over to Jabba the Hutt. C-3PO getting blown to bits. I mean, I don't think a lot of people expected that, and that's in the film's favor, really. There's a lot of nice introspective sort of sequences, like in the scene in the tree where Luke goes inside the tree and then sees Vader and gets a little bit of a fight, but then he cuts his head off, and then he sees, once the helmet explodes, he sees himself. So in a way, in order for him to become a true Jedi, in order for him to really win, he has to beat himself. He has to get over his own limitations. And maybe that's also maybe a little bit of a way to tell Luke that Vader is your father. Maybe that's a little bit of foreshadowing. You can look at it that way as well. And so yeah, Irvin Kershner, I just think did a spectacular job. I mean, setting up the shots. I mean, the film is just great. In a lot of ways, Lucas did a good job directing the first film, but you could tell it felt like an independent film. This this does not feel like that. This absolutely feels theatrical. It absolutely feels like there's someone at the helm that is a veteran who just knows how to set up all of his shots and knows how to do everything. And it's just a gorgeous looking film, and it's a really, really amazing directing job at Irvin Kershner, and may he rest in peace. The film is also produced by Gary Kurtz, based on a screenplay by Leigh Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan. Uh, it features new music by John Williams as well as the original music from Star Wars. You get the same Star Wars themes that you've had before, but with some new stuff. A little more expanded theme, a Luke and Leia theme, which I like, and of course the Empire's theme, the Imperial March. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. So, Imperial March is everybody's iconic as the main Star Wars theme, as the Rebels theme, as any other theme in the franchise. It was just John Williams outdoes himself. I think his score for this is, in some ways, a little bit better than his score from the first film. Um, just like I feel Empire as a whole, in some ways, is a little bit better than Star Wars. Uh, but not really as a whole. I mean, parts of Empire are better, specifically certain action sequences. The battle on Hoth and the asteroid field sequence with the Millennium Falcon are two of my all-time favorite action sequences out of the entire franchise. So, yeah, so those are a little bit better than Star Wars for me, but as a whole, I think it's on par with the first film. I think because it has a totally different goal in mind than the first film did, and it really succeeds with that, creating a very solid middle installment to get you excited and get you interested for the sequel and for the final film in the trilogy, and to really just throw you for a loop and just give this story where the Empire strikes back. Cinematography by Peter Suchitsky. I don't know if I'm saying his last names correctly. Suchitsky. Suchitsky. He does a great job. The editing by Paul Hirsch is really solid. Um, I don't really have a problem with any of that kind of stuff. The production design is fantastic as usual. Um, the look of Hoth, the everything, the look of Cloud City, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Gorgeous cinematography and gorgeous production design. Costume design is top notch as usual. It looks like they upped the ante a little bit, like because there was a little bit more of a budget. So even the costume design looks like it's a little bit more. Let's just say it looks a little bit more grand and not as low budget or as dingy, especially Vader's costume. Um, and then there's other subtle stuff too, of course, not really subtle stuff. The sound effects, of course, Ben Burtt comes back to do the sound effects. Memorable sound effects. I always remember the sounds of the carbonite freezing machine for some reason. That the sound that makes, that's always stuck with me. And that's credit to Ben Burtt and the sound designers. And yeah, of course, all the typical sound effects that you're used to seeing in the other films, or used to hearing in the other films, are here. And of course, the model work by ILM is fantastic, as usual, and a little bit of make effects you see are effective. And yeah, I mean, I really don't know what to say about the film other than the plot, but I mean, the plot is, I mean, it's Empire Strikes Back. I mean, it opens up with the battle on Hoth, which is awesome, which is one of the best battles I think I've seen in a film like this. It's epic. You have the AT-ATs walking around, you got the snow speeders, so it's not just X-Wings, so there's a little bit of variety there. Um, Really exciting, fun sequence, and you get to see Luke fly a snowspeeder. It crashes, but then you get to see a cool moment where he leaps up and uses his force powers, and slices through the bottom of the AT-AT and puts a bomb in there and drops down, and then it blows up. Um, I like how they disable one of the AT-ATs before, where they wrap it up with this cable, and then they detach it, and then the big clumsy AT-ATs fall onto the ice, and then they can shoot it with their laser blasts. And so I've just an awesome sequence. I love the sequence in Hoth, and even the sequences with the Wampas I really like. I like that sequence too. And Han going to search for Luke because Luke's gonna freeze, and of course the line of dialogue where the one officer guy's telling Han like, it's too cold out there. Before your tauntaun will freeze to death before you reach him, and then Han's like, well then I'll see you in hell, which I always thought was kind of a interesting sort of choice for uh, a line delivery there. And so, excuse me if I'm like sniffling, like my allergies are acting up right now for some stupid reason. But anyway, so I really like the stuff on Hoth, and then when it even heads off, you go for it's just a great, really exciting movie. It has some of the, I mean, you'd probably say it's the most action-packed of the films in the trilogy because you have the sequence on Hoth, which is epic and awesome and exciting and fun, and then you have the sequence. Then you have the asteroid field sequence where the Millennium Falcon's trying to get away, and you have the fun stuff where the light speed's not working. It was like, well, watch this, honey. Watch what? I thought I fixed this thing. That kind of fun stuff. And so yeah, I really, really like The Empire Strikes Back. And fun action sequence with good pacing, and then you go from that, and then you have the stuff on Dagobah with Yoda and Luke, and the famous lines of dialogue, do or do not, there is no try, and that's actually pretty an inspirational line of dialogue. And you have the fun banter on the Millennium Falcon between Leia and Han. You haven't have the fun banter before then, where he's thinking she needs a kiss, and he's like, I'd rather kiss a Wookiee. He's like, well, he needs a kiss. He could use a kiss. And then the whole thing where she insults him. Well, you scruffy looking, it's like, you scruffy looking nerfer, you stuck up, half-witted, scruffy looking nerf herder. Han Solo's like, who's scruffy looking? And I also like the fun stuff between C-3PO on the Millennium Falcon, and he's all like, the odds of surviving an asteroid field intact are 1,730 to 1. Never tell me the odds. So yeah, and I love that how the whole sequence is shot with the asteroid field with the TIE fighters chasing them, and how they land inside of what they think is an asteroid. It's a cave, but it's actually a giant space worm. I always liked that. That was pretty cool and inventive. And then you have the stuff in Cloud City, and then Luke fights Vader. It's a great confrontation. You have the sequence where Vader reveals himself to be Luke's father. It's an epic sequence. It's a very memorable scene. Uh, Hamill's acting in this is okay. It is definitely pretty whiny though, but I guess I can understand it though. Where he's like, "No, Ben told me you killed him." No, he doesn't say no. Actually, that never happens. He's like, he just says no. I am your father. He's like, no, that's impossible. That's impossible. And then, of course, Vader's trying, join me, together we will rule the galaxy as father and son. No, no, never, I'll never join you. Yeah, and then, of course, Luke decides, okay, I'd rather potentially kill myself than join the dark side. So he lets go of whatever he's holding on to and falls down the chute and holds on for dear life, contacts Leia. She hears him, and Leia and Lando and Chewie and C-3PO and R2, they go in and they pick up Luke. And then you have a little bit of the sort of stuff where the hyperdrive isn't working, and R2 fixes it, and then they end up getting away from the Star Destroyer. Vader almost has them again, and Luke, but they get away just in time. And Luke gets a new hand, and there we go. And Luke's putting his arm around Leia, and he's looking outside, and you see this great shot while they're looking out the window of the medical ship of all these rebel spaceships flying around, and then that's the end of The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, there's probably other stuff. There's other quotes. There's other things that I could mention, but it's The Empire Strikes Back. Everybody's heard of this film. Everybody's seen it. I didn't want this to be a really long review like the other review of Star Wars was. I wanted to make it a little bit shorter. So, but I also want to point out one last thing though. Vader's such a badass in this. I love how they set up Vader. He's the number one guy in this. He's not taking orders from Moff Tarkin. He's the guy giving the orders, and he's such a badass in this. I love how they reveal just a little bit of what he looks like under his helmet. I always remember that sequence where the thing opens up and it pulls his helmet off for a second, and then you see like, ew, like what is that? And I always remember as a kid like rewinding, fast forwarding, like what is that? Ew. And pausing it to try to you look at what it is, like what is ugly, what he looks like underneath the helmet. And then I always love how Vader just kept force choking his admirals if they failed. It's like, don't fail me again, and he does. It's just like, and there was a chance for even more of that. You could have had even more of that. Like there's a sequence near the end of the film where, of course, Admiral Piet doesn't do his job correctly, and the Millennium Falcon escapes, and Vader just walks away. And I was like, no, Vader should, while he's walking away out the door, he'd just be like, oh, an admiral. And, it just does the force choke, and then you just hear a body fall to the ground. That would have been badass. You failed me. Yeah, Vader. You don't want to fuck with Vader because if you fail Vader, like he's like he'll give you like one more try. He'd be like, don't fail me again. But if you do, uh, it's over. You're dead. Force choke. So yeah, I love that. And I do love how this film established the Empire as a viable threat. As because after Star Wars, the Rebels they won the battle, they blew up the Death Star, made the Empire look weak, and it's a good thing that the Empire Strikes Back decided we're not going to continue from that. We're not going to make the Rebels look like this unstoppable team of superheroes. We're going to deal them a blow. We're going to give the Empire their due. And I think that was a great choice. And it's a choice you don't see very often in a lot of these type of sequels or these type of trilogies. So I was really glad The Empire Strikes Back did that. It's another thing that makes it stand out. But anyway, yeah, I really don't know what else to say about The Empire Strikes Back, except it was a rate out of 5 stars. 5 out of 5. Nothing less than that. It's The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, what else? I mean, there's nothing else wrong. There's nothing wrong with it except for the weird chimpanzee-looking emperor, but that doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film that much. Just a little tiny nitpick. Everything else is great about this movie. It's a classic for a reason. It's considered one of the best films in the franchise and one of the best science fiction films ever made for a reason. And I don't disagree with that. It's an excellent film. It's a great movie. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of The Empire Strikes Back, and I will see you guys later. See ya.